Can you imagine waking up one morning, walking out to the back porch with a cup of coffee, and realizing 50 strangers are tearing up your land? That's exactly what happened to me. I still remember the sound before I even saw it. That deep metallic growl of engines, the kind that rattles your windows. At first I thought it was road work out on the county highway, but when I stepped outside it was coming from behind my house, from my property, and then I saw it. 3 bulldozers, 2 backhoes, and a line of survey flags cutting right across my fields. The same fields I'd mowed myself for years. I stood there frozen, mug in hand, trying to make sense of it. Men in hard hats shouting, trucks backing up, orange vests moving everywhere. It looked like the start of a construction site. "On my land," I shouted across the fence. "Hey, what are you doing back there?" One guy barely looked up and said, "Subdivision expansion." "You might want to move your stuff. Subdivision? Expansion?" That was the first time I heard those words, and they hit me like a punch. You see, I'd bought that property 15 years earlier. 12 beautiful acres by the lake, quiet and peaceful. I built my dream home out there, retired early, and thought I'd spend the rest of my life fishing, tending my fruit trees, and watching the sun set over the dam I maintained myself. But that morning, it felt like someone had stolen the ground right out from under me. I called the county office right away. They told me the area was being developed under an approved HOA expansion plan. I said, "There must be a mistake. That's my land." The woman on the phone sounded unsure, said she'd look into it and get back to me. But deep down, I already knew something was very, very wrong. When I finally drove around to where the workers had parked, I saw a huge banner that made my stomach turn. "Welcome to Lakeside Meadows, Phase 2. Luxury living starts here." Phase 2? I never agreed to a Phase 1, and that's when it clicked. The neighborhood across the creek. The one that had popped up a few years ago. Big fancy houses with matching mailboxes and a homeowners association that seemed to think they owned everything within sight. I'd gotten their flyers before. "Join our community events. Support our property value initiatives." I always tossed them in the trash. I didn't live in their community. I lived next to it, on my own, free, private land. Or at least I thought I did. By the end of that day, heavy equipment had torn down my back fence and dug trenches straight through my property line. I tried talking to the foreman, but he handed me a clipboard and said, "You'll need to speak with the HOA Development Board. We've got authorization." Authorization from who? Not from me. That night I barely slept. My land was lit up like a construction zone. Engines growling past midnight, floodlights blazing. I just sat on my porch watching decades of peace vanish one scoop of dirt at a time. And I remember thinking, how is this even possible? How can a homeowners association decide they own your property? How can someone just redraw your boundaries? That's when the real nightmare began. Because as I would soon find out, this wasn't a mistake. This was a plan. One they'd been putting together for months, and they'd picked the wrong homeowner to mess with. When I bought that property, I wasn't chasing luxury. I was chasing peace. After 40 years in construction, I'd had enough of deadlines, city traffic, and noise. My wife and I wanted someplace quiet, someplace to grow old without worrying about nosy neighbors or rule books about what color our mailbox had to be. We found it, 12 acres by the lake, just outside city limits. Back then it was nothing but open land, wild grass, and the soft sound of water spilling over a small natural dam. I remember saying, "This is it. This is where we'll spend the rest of our days." It took us 5 years to turn that piece of land into our home. I built the house myself, and stone by stone, beam by beam. A wraparound porch, oak trees framing the drive, and that little dam I reinforced to manage the creek's overflow. I wasn't just a homeowner. I was a caretaker of that land. Every morning I'd take my coffee out by the water, check the pressure gauges, clear out debris, and make sure the lake stayed healthy. That dam was more than a project, and it was a promise that I'd protect this place. And for years, life was exactly how I'd pictured it. My wife tended her rose garden. Our grandkids came every summer to fish off the dock. And the only mail I ever got was from the post office, never from a homeowners association. Then, about 6 years ago, the change began. A developer bought up the fields across the creek, hundreds of acres that used to be farmland. Before long, trucks rolled in and signs started popping up. Future home of Lakeside Meadows. At first, I didn't think much of it. People build neighborhoods all the time. They had their land. I had mine. No harm done. Then came the HOA. It started small. Glossy newsletters in my mailbox even though I wasn't a member. Join our community block party. Keep our lake beautiful. Volunteer today. Friendly stuff. Too friendly. Then one day a woman showed up at my gate, dressed sharp, clipboard in hand. She introduced herself as Karen Blake, president of the Lakeside Meadows Homeowners Association. I remember her words clear as day. She said, "We just wanted to welcome you to the extended Lakeside community. Since your property borders our lake, we'll be coordinating some shared maintenance going forward." I laughed. I said, "Ma'am, I'm not part of your community. This here's private property. Always has been." She smiled that tight little HOA smile and said, "Oh, I'm sure we'll work something out. After all, property lines can be so flexible once the city updates its maps." At the time, I brushed it off as a weird comment, but looking back now, that was the first red flag, the first hint of what was coming. Over the next few months, they started acting like they owned the place. Their landscapers accidentally trimmed my trees. Kids from their subdivision cut across my fields to reach the lake. One of their maintenance crews even installed a drainage pipe that emptied runoff right into my dam. Every time I confronted someone, they just shrugged. "Talk to the HOA," they'd say. Then came the letters. Envelopes stamped with Lakeside Meadows HOA. Addressed to me, even though I wasn't under their jurisdiction. They weren't friendly this time. One of them said, "You are required to contribute to the Community Lake Maintenance Fund." Another warned, "Your unapproved fencing does not meet neighborhood standards." Neighborhood standards?
I didn't even live in their neighborhood.
I called their office, and guess who picked up? Karen Blake herself. When I told her to stop harassing me, she just sighed and said, "You'll understand once the survey corrections go through. It's all standard zoning procedure." That phrase, survey corrections, didn't mean much to me then, but it would soon become the weapon they used to steal my land. For the moment, though, I just wanted peace. I tossed the letters aside, put up a fresh private property sign, and went back to tending the dam. I told myself they'd get bored and move on. But I was wrong, because the next time they reached out, it wasn't with a letter. It was with a notice claiming part of my land already belonged to them. And that was the moment the war with the HOA officially began. I'll never forget the day that letter showed up. Plain white envelope, HOA logo on the top. I almost tossed it straight into the trash, and until I noticed the words property, reclassification notice inside was a neatly typed letter claiming that after a recent boundary survey correction, a portion of my land was now considered part of the Lakeside Meadows Community Development Zone. It went on to say that the area had already been approved for Phase 2 construction, and that I'd soon receive an updated plat map and community dues assessment. I must have read that paragraph 10 times, trying to make sense of it. My first thought was, this has to be a joke. I drove down to the county clerk's office that same afternoon. The clerk pulled up the parcel map on her computer, and there it was. A new line slicing right through my property. About 4 acres, at the best acres, the ones near the lake, had been relabeled as Phase 2 residential. I said, "Ma'am, there's been a mistake. That's my land. I have the deed right here." She looked uncomfortable, like she'd seen this before. "Sir," she said quietly, "the paperwork looks legitimate. It's been signed off by zoning, planning, and the HOA's developer." The HOA's developer? Since when did a private neighborhood get to redraw county maps? I stormed out of that office, shaking with anger. I went straight home, grabbed my deed, my original survey, my property tax receipts, everything, and called the number on that letter. Guess who answered? Karen Blake. That voice still makes my blood boil. Calm, clipped. The kind of tone people use when they already think they've won. She said, "Oh, I was wondering when you'd call." "Yes, Mr. Carter, we're aware of the overlap. It's all being handled through proper channels." I said, "Handled? You forged a map." She laughed, and then said, "Now let's not throw around accusations. These boundaries were corrected according to historical plats. You're welcome to attend the next HOA meeting if you want to appeal." Appeal? Appeal what? Theft? That's when she hit me with the line I'll never forget. She said, "You really should have paid your association dues like everyone else." It might have helped your case. I was speechless. Dues. I wasn't part of their HOA, but that's how they play. Intimidation and paperwork. The next morning, I drove to City Hall myself. I asked for the public records on the new development permits. After a lot of waiting and a few sideways looks, an assistant finally slid a folder across the counter. Inside were stamped permits showing Lakeside Meadows Phase 2, approved construction 50 units. Right under the signature line, I saw a name, Karen Blake, listed as the property coordinator, and under that, a forged signature of mine. It was my name, my handwriting style, even my initials. But it wasn't me. I felt my chest tighten. My hands shook so hard I could barely hold the papers. I asked the clerk, "How can this be approved?" "You don't check the signatures?" She said, "Sir, if the documents are notarized and filed properly, we have to assume they're legitimate." So someone, probably Karen or her developer buddies, had fabricated an entire paper trail that made it look like I'd agreed to sell or transfer part of my land. And the city rubber stamped it. I went home and started pulling every document I had from storage. The original blueprints, the water management permit for my dam, the environmental easement that clearly stated the creek and runoff zones were federally monitored. I thought I had them cornered. But when I sent everything to the city's legal department, weeks went by with no reply. And when they finally did respond, all they said was, "At this time, we find no evidence of deliberate fraud. The construction will continue pending review." That's when the first bulldozer rolled in, and I realized this wasn't some misunderstanding. This was organized theft disguised as bureaucracy. I tried reasoning with the crew supervisor. I even showed him my deed. He said, "Sir, we're just following orders. You'll need to talk to the board president, Karen, again." Always Karen. I called her one last time. Told her I was getting a lawyer, that she was trespassing, and that she'd regret every inch of dirt they moved. She just said, "Mr. Carter, progress waits for no one. If you resist, the HOA will pursue damages for obstructing development." Damages. They were building on my land, and somehow I was the one obstructing. That's the day I realized, and this wasn't about right or wrong anymore. This was a fight. And if they wanted a fight, they were about to get one. Because I wasn't about to let anyone, not an HOA, not a crooked developer, not even the city, steal the land I built my life on. The morning after that last phone call with Karen, I woke up to the sound of jackhammers. They'd already started pouring concrete. Every instinct in me wanted to run down there and shut the whole thing off. But my lawyer's voice was in my head. "Don't touch the equipment, don't block the crews. Document everything." So that's what I did. I bought a drone, set up motion cameras along the fence line, and started a paper trail of my own. Every truck license plate, every shift log, every photo of construction that crossed my boundary, dated, stamped, and filed. If they wanted to fight dirty, I'd fight smart. Within a week, I filed for an emergency injunction. The city clerk told me it would take a few business days. It took 3 weeks. By then, they'd already poured the foundations for a row of houses and carved a road that stopped 10 feet from my dam wall. When the injunction finally came through, I thought it was over. The order said, "Cease all construction activity pending property dispute resolution." I printed 10 copies, drove straight to the site, and handed one to the foreman. He read it, shrugged, and said, "You'll have to talk to Ms. Blake. We've been told to continue." I called Karen right there on speaker. She answered like she'd been waiting. "Mr. Carter, we received your little order. Our attorneys have appealed it. Construction proceeds under the developer's variance." Variance. Another loophole. Another piece of paper twisting the law to their side. That night I called my lawyer again. He sounded tired already. "Listen," he said, "they've got influence in City Hall. You're going to need public pressure." So I called the local news. A young reporter came out with a camera crew. We walked the site together and I showed him the survey maps, the dam permits, the forged signature. He looked shocked. He said, "You realize this could be one of the biggest zoning scandals in the county?" The segment aired 2 nights later. It was supposed to help, but instead the HOA retaliated. Within a week, I started getting fines in the mail. Property neglect, $250. Unapproved structure, $500. They were fining me for the mess they'd created. One notice even claimed my dam violated community aesthetics. A dam. It had been there before the HOA even existed. Then came the community pressure. Neighbors I barely knew started leaving voicemails. "Why can't you just cooperate? You're holding back progress." One man even yelled from his truck, "Stop being selfish, old man." We need housing. They painted me as the villain, some bitter retiree standing in the way of the American dream. But I wasn't giving up. Every night I sat at my kitchen table with stacks of paperwork spread across it, highlighting inconsistencies, cross-checking dates. My wife, God bless her, would bring me coffee and just say, "Don't let them win." That kept me going. I found one small crack in their armor. The HOA's permit referenced shared water management, but nowhere did it mention the federal oversight on my dam. The creek that fed it was part of a protected watershed, and any modification required a state environmental review. They didn't have it. I sent the evidence to the county engineer's office and CC'd every local news outlet I could find. For a moment, it looked like the tide might turn. Inspectors came out, cameras followed, and Karen's confident smile started to slip. But the next week, someone in the planning department quietly stamped a retroactive approval. Environmental review satisfied. Just like that, they were covered again. That's when I realized how deep their connections went. The HOA had friends in the city council, real estate developers on their board, and lawyers who could twist the law until it screamed. But I wasn't about to roll over. If they wanted to push, I'd push harder. I filed complaints with the state water board, mailed copies of my deeds to every news channel within 50 miles, and even started an online petition. Thousands of signatures poured in from people who'd had their own HOA nightmares. Still, the machines kept running. Every day the noise grew louder, the dust thicker, and the road crept closer to the dam. One morning I looked out and saw a concrete mixer parked right against my spillway wall. That's when it hit me. If they damaged that structure, the whole valley below could flood. I waved my arms, shouting for them to stop, but the foreman just smirked and said, "Orders from the board." That was the moment I knew this wasn't just about property lines anymore. It was about control, about proving that one man couldn't stand against the machine. But they were wrong, because I wasn't fighting for a plot of dirt. I was fighting for my home, my freedom, and the principle that no HOA, no matter how powerful, gets to rewrite reality. And soon, they'd push just one step too far, and that's when everything would break. You ever have that one moment when you realize the fight isn't just unfair? It's personal. That morning was mine. It was early spring. Storm clouds were building in the distance, and the air felt heavy, like the land itself was holding its breath. I went down to the dam just after sunrise to check the overflow gates, and that's when I saw them. 3 construction trucks, a crew of men in orange vests, and one backhoe parked right on top of my dam embankment. I froze. They weren't supposed to be anywhere near it. The court order, the county zoning map, everything said that structure was mine. I waved my arms and shouted, "Hey, you're trespassing." The foreman looked up from his clipboard, half smirking. "We're rerouting drainage for Phase 2 HOA authorization." My stomach dropped. "That's a federal waterway," I yelled back. "You can't touch it." He just shrugged. "Talk to your board president, my board president." That phrase hit harder than it should have. Like they'd already decided I was one of them, whether I liked it or not. I grabbed my phone, started recording, and walked closer. "You're breaking the law," I said, my voice shaking. "That dam holds back 1 million gallons of water. You dig here, you compromise the wall." One of the workers, clearly nervous, muttered, "Boss, we shouldn't be doing this." But the foreman waved him off and signaled the backhoe. And then, the sound I'll never forget. That first crack of concrete breaking, I felt it through my boots. It was like hearing a bone snap. My dam, my life's work, splitting open under the weight of arrogance. I sprinted toward them, screaming for them to stop. They just kept digging. By the time I got close, water was already seeping through the cracks, dark and steady. I could see the current pushing mud out in little bursts. That's when I lost it. I grabbed the foreman's radio and hurled it into the creek. He backed off, yelling something about calling the cops, but I didn't care anymore. I stood there, chest heaving, hands trembling, watching years of labor and love crumble in front of me. By the time the sheriff arrived, they'd already left. Probably called ahead, claiming I'd threatened the crew. The deputy, a young guy who clearly didn't want to be there, looked over the site, shook his head and said, "Sir, you can file a complaint with the county, but we can't stop authorized work." "Authorized?" I shouted. "That's my dam. That's my property." He just sighed. "I'm sorry, sir. On paper, it's not so clear anymore. That was the breaking point. Standing there staring at the crack running through the dam wall, I realized the system wasn't built for people like me. It was built for people like them. The ones who knew which hand to shake and which form to file. The ones who could rewrite the rules while you were still learning what game you were in. When I got home, my wife saw my face and didn't say a word. She just handed me a towel, sat me down, and held my hand. After a while, she said softly, "They don't care about the law. You have to make them care." And that stuck with me. That night, I sat out on the porch with the rain starting to fall. The air smelled like wet earth and gasoline. In the distance, I could see the construction floodlights reflecting off the water, their glow trembling with every ripple. They thought they'd won. They thought they could break me, break my dam, and walk away untouched, but what they didn't realize was that I knew that dam better than anyone, and I knew what would happen if nature got just a little help remembering where it used to flow. I didn't make the decision right then, but something shifted in me that night. The anger hardened into something colder, sharper, not rage anymore, resolve. Because if they wanted to play God with water and land, then they were about to find out what that really meant. It's funny how quiet revenge can be. No shouting, no screaming, just the sound of rain tapping on your window and the steady rhythm of your own heartbeat. After that day at the dam, I barely slept. Every night I'd hear the echo of cracking concrete in my head. But something inside me had changed. That helplessness was gone, replaced by something calmer, focused. If the HOA wanted to play games with paperwork and politics, fine. I'd let nature handle the paperwork for me. See, most people don't understand how dams work. They think it's about holding back water. But it's really about balance, flow, pressure, release. Too much control for too long and everything starts to push back, and that week, the weather forecast said heavy rain. Not a drizzle, a storm. The kind that turns dry creeks into roaring rivers overnight. So I started preparing. Not to destroy anything, I wasn't that kind of man. But to remind them of what they were messing with. I double-checked my maintenance records, read through the water management code, and confirmed something important. That dam gate and the spillway release was still legally mine. It had never been transferred, never sold, never listed under the HOA's permits, meaning I still had every right to manage it, to relieve pressure in the event of heavy rainfall. And with that storm on the horizon, there was plenty of pressure to relieve. By Thursday, the sky had turned the color of wet slate. The construction crews were still working like nothing had happened, cutting curbs, pouring sidewalks, laying pipes that were never meant to exist. Karen even drove by in her silver SUV that afternoon. I saw her from the porch, sunglasses on, phone glued to her ear, that little smirk she wore like armor. I wondered if she even remembered what it felt like to earn something, instead of bullying it into existence. That night, the rain came hard. Sheets of it. The gutters overflowed and the creek started to roar louder than I'd heard in years. I stood by the dam, flashlight in hand, water rising fast against the gate. My boots were already sinking into the mud, and that's when it hit me. That dam had always been about control, and all this time I'd let them take that from me. My land, my peace, my voice. Not tonight. I opened the control hatch, the one they'd ignored when they cut through the wall. I ran my hand along the lever, cold and slick with rainwater. Then I turned it, not all the way, just enough. Enough to let the water breathe. The sound was deafening. A rush, a deep guttural release as the pressure poured through. The floodgate screamed like a living thing. The kind of sound that makes the earth itself vibrate. Within minutes, the runoff channel below surged, and the newly paved road at the edge of the HOA's development started to vanish under brown. Churning water, I didn't destroy a thing. I didn't break the law. I just let nature correct their mistake. By morning, the storm had passed. The air was calm again, almost peaceful. But from my porch, I could see the damage. Half their model homes were flooded. The show lot's white picket fence was half buried in mud. Sidewalks cracked, driveways collapsed. The road they'd bragged about, the one built to last and had buckled like cardboard. And the best part? My property was untouched. The dam stood firm, doing exactly what it was designed to do, release excess water safely. Around 9 a.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered, "Mr. Carter," the voice snapped. "What did you do?" "Karen." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Good morning to you too, Karen. Rough night?" "Don't play games with me. The lower development is underwater. "You're responsible for this," I chuckled. "Responsible? For the rain?" There was silence on the line. That angry, sputtering kind of silence when someone realizes they've lost control of the conversation. Finally, she hissed, "You'll pay for this," I said. "No, Karen, for once you will." And then I hung up. I stood on my porch that morning, watching the water recede, sunlight breaking through the clouds. For the first time in months, I felt calm. Not because I'd won, not yet, but because balance had been restored. The land had spoken. And now the world was finally listening. I didn't expect the news vans, or the county trucks, or the army of men in hard hats and clipboards swarming the development 2 days later. But I'll tell you this. When karma decides to clock in, she doesn't punch out early. Turns out, the flooding did more than ruin a few shiny new sidewalks. It exposed everything the HOA and their developer had been hiding. And once the county engineers showed up, the whole crooked foundation of their little empire started crumbling. I got the first call from a local reporter. She said, "Mr. Carter, we heard you own the dam that failed near the new Lakeside HOA. Would you like to comment?" I almost laughed. "Failed?" I said. "That dam worked perfectly. Maybe they should have checked their permits before paving a flood zone." That was all it took. By the next morning, there was a news van parked right outside my gate. The headline that night, "Developer faces scrutiny after HOA homes flood on private property." And in the background of every clip, there was my dam, standing tall, intact, and proud. The engineers didn't take long to find the truth. Illegal drainage reroutes, forged plats, falsified boundary lines submitted under an old county code that hadn't been valid in 10 years. It was like watching a magician's trick fall apart under bright lights. Every secret revealed, every illusion shattered. The city halted all construction immediately. Then came the lawsuits. Neighbors who'd pre-purchased lots demanded refunds. The developer's insurance company pulled coverage. The bank froze funding. And right in the middle of it all, the HOA board, Karen Blake, president and self-proclaimed protector of community standards, was suddenly facing a storm she couldn't control. The same woman who once barked about fines and bylaws was now the subject of 3 separate investigations. I remember seeing her one morning, standing knee-deep in mud near the half-finished cul-de-sac, talking to reporters. She looked smaller somehow. The sunglasses gone, the confidence drained away. One of the reporters shouted, "Did you have authorization to build on private land?" Karen hesitated, forced a smile, and said, "It was a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding." That word still makes me laugh, because by then the county records had already confirmed what I'd been saying all along. That land was mine. Every inch of it, and the so-called survey correction, a complete forgery. When the dust settled, the HOA's developer faced multiple fraud charges. The city revoked every single permit tied to the subdivision. Construction stopped. Permanently. The next HOA meeting, and the one that was supposed to address community concerns, ended with a vote of no confidence. Karen was forced to resign on the spot. I wasn't there, but a neighbor sent me a clip from their live stream. As she walked out, someone yelled from the back, "You should have respected the dam." I couldn't have said it better myself. That week, the local paper ran a headline that made me smile every time I passed a newsstand. "Man floods illegally built HOA development. Turns out, he was right." For months, people stopped me in town to shake my hand. Some just smiled and said, "Good for you." Others said, "Wish I had the guts to do what you did." But truth is, it wasn't about guts. It was about boundaries. You can only push a person so far before they remind you whose ground you're standing on. And as the investigation dragged on and the lawsuits piled higher than their busted curbs, I realized something. Justice doesn't always come from a courtroom. Sometimes it comes from a rising creek and a man who finally decides to open the gate. It's been a year now. The lawsuits have come and gone. The headlines faded. The TV trucks stopped showing up. But every morning when I step onto my porch and look across that quiet stretch of water, I still feel it. That deep, peaceful hum of justice served. The land is whole again. The survey maps have been corrected permanently this time, with my name printed right where it always should have been. The county even issued an apology, said it was an unfortunate clerical oversight. I didn't bother correcting them. Some truths don't need words. The HOA, gone. dissolved completely. Those 50 empty lots are nothing but open grass now, slowly being reclaimed by the trees. The roads they built are cracked and broken, nature already taking back what they stole. Sometimes I walk down there after it rains, the smell of wet earth rising from the ground. The sound of the creek running free again. It doesn't feel like vengeance anymore, just balance. Funny thing is, a few of the old HOA members reached out to me later. Not to apologize, most people like that never do, but to ask how I managed to win. I told them the truth, I didn't win. I endured. I stayed patient. I stayed rooted. And when the time came, I let the truth do the talking, through the flow of the water and the silence that followed. One afternoon, I sat by the dam with a cup of coffee and watched the sunset paint the water gold. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from beating someone, the kind that comes from knowing you never let them take who you are. That dam used to just be part of my property. Now it's a reminder that some boundaries are more than lines on a map. They're lines in the soul, and when people try to cross them, well, sometimes nature steps in to set things right. Would I do it again? I don't know, maybe not. But I'll tell you this, I sleep just fine knowing the land is finally back where it belongs. So to anyone out there fighting their own HOA nightmare, don't let them break you. Stand your ground, know your rights, and remember, even the smallest ripple can turn into a flood when you've got truth on your side. Subscribe if you've ever watched karma flow exactly where it belonged.